Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the God Talk, guys. My name is Michael Mack. This is my beloved friend Michael Koran, and we're here to talk about God, faith, spirituality, and all things of a mystical nature. This is something we do every week at this time, 7:30 p.m., and sometimes we do it at 7 p.m. because Michael and I get together at the 7 o'clock slot, his slot, for his show. So we're here this evening to talk about God, and there's something that I thought that I might like to tell a story. I love to tell stories, and in the last segment, we were talking about what it's like when, after having the experience of God, after having the connection, the sense of union with God, when suddenly it goes away. And very recently I had that experience myself, and I would like to share a little bit about that, share that story. How's that sound to you?
Sounds wonderful.
Okay. Well, you've heard this story, so it may be a little bit different than the way you heard it
I would imagine
45 minutes ago.
I imagine it will be, yes.
But the facts will remain the same. So, God is very important in my life. Prayer is very important in my life. And prayer is the way that I feel the most natural way to connect with God, to open myself to that blessedness, that holiness that lives inside me and lives outside me and lives with all of us. And most of my life, most of my recent life, I'm grateful to say that I've had the chance through prayer to connect with that. But every now and then, it disappears. And this week was one of those times. And on Wednesday, I did a show down in Framingham. And
You might want to tell people what the show is, a tiny bit.
the show is about why I left the Catholic Church and why I returned to the Catholic Church. And the show is called Conversations with My Molester, A Journey of Faith. And so it goes through a very difficult experience, but ultimately it turns toward a very beautiful experience. And this particular show took a lot out of me. And I can't say I know exactly why, but I really felt whipped, is the word that comes to mind. I really felt like it just took a lot out. And within a couple of days, even a couple of days later, I still felt like I was still had a kind of inner exhaustion. And as I often do when I'm facing some kind of difficulty, I prayed. I turned toward that beloved that lives inside me and outside me and inside all of us, and I reached out. And that's basically what praying is for me. It's just reaching out. And most of the time, something beautiful reaches back. But nothing was reaching back. It felt like my words were just going out there and just echoing around in the empty spaces because nothing was happening. It was just me. It was just me and that internal noise that just goes, that racket that is with us much of the time. So I wasn't getting any callbacks. And it was disconcerting to me. And I felt at the same time that I was experiencing that, I was just feeling this great lethargy, this great both physical and psychic depression. And and I imagine that someone in a clinical world would call it exactly that, would call it depression. And I was really struggling mightily with it because the thing that I had been living for and living with for so long was gone. And it seemed like there was nothing I could do about it. And so in a way I kind of gave up trying to do something about it. And I was living what felt like a kind of half-life to me. Now on Saturday, yesterday, I got together with a couple of friends of mine from out of town, and they came to Harvard Square, and so I was showing them around Harvard Square, showing them Harvard Yard and Harvard Square proper, and various sites around the square. And we happened to pass by in our travels a monastery, an Episcopal monastery, St. John the Evangelist, which is on Memorial Drive. And many, 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 many years ago, a woman who I was dating took me to this secret place right next to the monastery. It's a little garden. It's quite beautiful, enclosed. And so I took my friends there. And so we went in and looked around and sat there for a couple of minutes and then left and continued on our way. And I said goodbye to my friends maybe a couple of hours later. And I had this strong need, this longing, this want to pray, even though I wasn't expecting anything to come back. It's just something like I felt like I needed to do. And so I decided to go back to that little garden. And by then it was dark, and there was just a little bit of light coming off the street. So I let myself into the garden, and I went to a far corner that was even darker, and I started praying, which for me, again, just means reaching out and asking a question, hoping for an answer. And I wasn't hearing any answers. But after a couple of minutes, the door at the far end of the courtyard opens up, the door at the far end of the garden opens up, and this great dark shadow enters into the garden and starts walking toward me. And I'm down on the grass, and I look up, and I think, well, this is getting interesting. I was asking for help, I was praying for help, and now this great dark shadow is crossing the garden towards me. Could this be an answer? And as the shadow got closer, I realized that it was one of the brothers in the monastery. He was wearing the full garb, the full the cowl and the robe of one of the brothers in the monastery. And when he got within a few feet of me, I said, "Hi," and he started because he didn't know I was there. It was too dark. And he said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I'm just praying." And he said, "Oh, okay." And so he went and walked off in a different direction. And then I felt this impulse to reach out to him, and I said, "Would you mind? Would you like to talk for just a few minutes?" Because my thinking was, if anybody knows about the dark night of the soul, which is my language for what I was experiencing, the sudden departure or seeming departure of God, that surely it would be somebody who is in this field, in the field of God, surely. So that was my thinking, is that we might have a chance to talk a little bit about that, and I might have the chance to ask, what happens when God just disappears, when you have the presence and the present goes away? It's like when you were talking a little bit earlier about your beloved. When your beloved left you, suddenly there's this vacuum, there is this emptiness. What do you do with that? But I asked him if he would be interested in talking. He said sure. He only had a few minutes because he had something that he had to do. But he sat down on the bench and we started talking. We didn't talk about my thing after all. We were just talking about this and that. But he mentioned that at the church, St. John the Evangelist on Memorial Drive, that they were going to have a service shortly. And he was going to officiate, so he had to go to that. And this is called Compline, which is one of a series of services that are done in the Catholic and other Christian churches during the day, in the monastic tradition. And this is the last service of the day. And if I wanted, I could go. So I thought to myself, hell yeah, I'll go. But I said, okay, sure. I'd be delighted. Thanks for the invitation. And so the bell rang. It was time to go. So I put on my shoes and I walked into the chapel. And the chapel was filled with maybe 15, 18 people. Half of them, I think, brothers from the monastery. And half of them just civilians, people from our walk of life, men and women. And we're all seated around a circle. And somebody gave me a book that had different prayers and different chants on it. And next thing you know, we're all chanting this final hour of the day, this last service of the day. It's 8:30 p.m. and we're thanking God for the day, and we are asking that it come to a perfect close, and whatever that means to God, that we serve God's will here in the world. And Michael, I really can't explain or understand what happened, but something shifted inside me. And maybe it was because I was in this community of people who were all worshiping together.
Yes.
Worshiping using the same liturgy, the same text, the same words. Maybe each of us individually understanding the words in a different way, but having our own special resonance with them. Or maybe it was being in this place that was so deeply, deeply, deeply silent. If we weren't chanting or praying, the silence was absolutely ringing. My ears were ringing with the silence. But we were all sharing in this short ceremony of about 20 minutes, and something shifted inside of me in the most amazing way. And I felt uplifted in a way that I couldn't have imagined, not even an hour before. And I walked out after it was over. I thanked Brother Mark for inviting me in, and I went out, and I just stood on the sidewalk just feeling stunned. Like something had happened that I had no name for, that I really wasn't praying for. I mean, I was praying for help or hope or something. And something came, something arrived. And so it was like what the Psalms so often say. In the Psalms, very often, the psalmist will be asking for God, thirsting for God, pleading for God. God, where are you? Have you left me all by myself? As Jesus himself did in the Gospel of John. Why, Father, why hast thou forsaken me? Why have you left me alone? And then something happens. Something opens up. And in an earlier time in my life, I would have tried to explain or understand it in some rational way. Well, this happened and this happened and this happened. But I'm not interested in doing that anymore. That to me reduces the mystery and miracle of our everyday life to something explainable. And I've become very impatient with what is explainable, what we can reduce to a sentence or an explanation, because it reduces the immensity of what we are living in and living with down to something we can trot out in a sentence. And I just don't want to I'm not interested in doing that anymore. That to me that simply does not have the life that I have come to know in not having that explanation, but just in being, as you have talked about yourself, in being, your heart being naked to your experiences, naked to the world, feeling anything and everything as it comes up. Whatever the suffering, whatever the joy, just feeling it all. And so that's what I had to go back in and thank one of the brothers. Thank you for the miracle. I didn't know, I had no idea that God could arrive in such a way. Thank you. And I got on my bicycle and I rode back home, and it was a different world.
Wow.
I was living in a completely different world. And that mystery and that beauty and that immensity, having had a taste of that, how can we ask for anything else, ever? How can we ask for anything smaller once we have a taste of that greatness that is with us and around us all the time, for the taking? All we have to do is say please, or yes, or thank you, and we're halfway there.
And then what you've said several times, not in this show, is how to be with that experience in your daily life, both on, which includes this television show. And
Yeah, right now, this second.
so another question, you can choose either or both, is how does telling the story, maybe not how, or telling the story, what do you feel and think?
I guess telling the story, what comes to me right now as you ask the question, is that telling the story is not unlike telling a parable. It's like a personal parable. That here are these events that happened with a beginning and a middle and an end. And I get to draw from that some conclusion, some answer, some piece of wisdom. And so that's what telling the story is for me. It's a way of encapsulating an experience and then being able to draw out, so it's like a clam. It's like the story is like a clam. It's like all the relevant parts are inside this clam, but if you are able to reach inside the clam, you can pull out this pearl, which is the essence of the story. And I think for me, the essence of that story was something about faith, something about trust. That even in our darkness and even in our despair, that there is something waiting for us, something beautiful waiting for us. And one of the things that I came away with, one of the pearls, was the idea that during this time that I was longing for and thirsting for God, it's like being apart from a lover, from a beloved, and really, really, really missing them and feeling empty without them, dead without them. And suddenly when they come back, it's like, hallelujah! Thank you. Thank you for coming back. Thank you for being here. I guess it reminds me of the parable of the prodigal son. The son runs off and squanders all the father's money, and after many years finally comes back, and the other brother, who has been diligent working alongside the father all this time, sees the father run out towards the son who had left and squandered all the money, and embrace him and kiss him and say, let's kill the fatted calf and let's have a big feast. Because he was gone, but now he's back. So, I guess after the beloved leaves and is gone for a little while, when the beloved returns, it's a time for rejoicing. And that's what I've been doing today.
Wow.
Is just saying, thank you,
Wow.
thank you, thank you.
Well, thank you for teaching me and maybe others to celebrate this. I have a tendency to just say, "Oh, okay, good. What's next?" and take it more for granted than I hope I don't, now that I've heard you speak this way.
Well, here's one of the things that happened over the course of these last few days. You know, like many people, and often this is psychologically and therapeutically very helpful. If we're in a desperate place, if we're in a hard place, a difficult place, psychically or physically, trusting that this too will pass. And I'm not putting that down at all, because it's an extremely valuable thing to do, to remember that, you know, I've been in a bad place before and I've gotten out of it. But what I was doing differently this time, and finding a value in it, maybe in part because I was kind of discovering it for myself this time, is saying just the opposite, saying that I have never, ever, ever been in a place like this, which actually is really true. Our bodies have never been the bodies that they are right this moment. That our minds have never been the minds that they are right this moment. The sum total of our experience has never been what it is right now. And to be in that place where I don't know if God will ever come back was to feel really bereft and really forsaken. But conversely, when I felt that reconnection, to know and to feel that it's never been like this before either. I don't know, there was just something worth exploring in there.
Worth celebrating.
Celebrating, all right. I'm up for that.
Oh, thank you. So there's a brief story about St. Francis.
Oh, tell me.
So he's praying like you,
Mm-hmm.
and according to the story, he hears God say, "Would you be willing to go to hell for 7 days and then be in heaven forever?"
Sounds good on the surface.
And he says, "Sure."
Yeah.
And the first,
What, are you kidding? Sure.
yes, then the first step into hell, you forget the promise.
Oh. Yeah.
And so and I've had
Oh.
this happen again and again,
Oh.
so many times coming out.
Is that the end of the story?
That's the end of the story.
That's a great
That's
story.
the end of the story. And it's very hard for me to remember, your story might help, that the next time this happens and we feel empty and lost, dead, and for me, even when I pray, I get a nasty voice back, cursing me. And some little part, but only a little.
Okay, and who or what is that voice?
I don't know. I mean, this is your show, so we probably shouldn't explore it too much. But that voice might be, I don't know, but I don't want to go into it now.
Okay.
Thank you. It's a very rich question. But whatever it is, it's
A
not,
future God Talk, guys. We'll tackle that question.
It's not nice. And it's I ask God for help and I get cursed out.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's my mom in there or my dad.
Mm-hmm.
But but there's some little tiny little part in me, maybe, that remembers I'm going to get out of this time. I think it's there, but only and maybe your story can help me focus a little bit more on that, and to have faith, I guess, that even when it's empty and I'm getting cursed out by some being, that all will be well. All manner of things.
All manner of things will be well.
It's interesting that you felt called to go to the garden.
Well, I knew that I wanted to go somewhere. And the first place I went to was, because I was right nearby, was Radcliffe Yard. But I went into Radcliffe Yard, and all of the grass was cordoned off, so you couldn't go out into the middle of the grass, which is where I wanted to be. And so I thought, well, that stinks. Now where am I going to go? And then what popped into my mind was going back
Wow.
to the monastic garden.
Was it popped in, or because one time you told that you said you felt called to go to that garden?
Popped in and called are kind of the same,
Oh,
are often the same thing. It's hard to know sometimes what is a call, what is just my mind, but the call usually has some special element of vitality to it, something very attractive about it. That's what I think of as a call. So, looks like we've got what, about a minute and a half?
yes.
How are we gonna close up shop here?
Let me ask the same question again. Speaking about this, if this is a helpful question,
Okay.
speaking about this, how does it feel? How does the experience feel to you now, and how do you feel speaking about it?
I feel like I'm ready for the next thing, whatever the next thing is, whatever the next event in life is. I feel refreshed, and having told the story, you know, every single day, you just don't know what's going to happen. It's amazing. Every single day brings just event after event after event, whether it's outside us or inside us. And, oh, it's just something to celebrate. And remember, we're here for just a little while, just a tiny, tiny little while. So what are we going to do with it?
Which is very true, like 15 more seconds is the little
That's
while
it.
we're here.
So if we knew that we had 15 seconds left to live, or 10 seconds
9,
now,
8,
what would we do?
7, count them down. No.
Here we are.
Thank you for joining us.
Here we are.